All right, it's good to be with you. I've had the privilege of being here several times, which I consider to be a compliment and a privilege, and I just want you to know I'm happy to be with you tonight. We're going to be looking tonight at Luke chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. We'll go there in a minute and read that. But before we read it, I want to tell a story that I think will help kind of provide some context and background to help us appreciate and understand the story. So, the story is like this. It's a true story, by the way. And the story is related about a university in Nebraska back in 2016, so it wasn't that long ago. But this university has a symposium of Jewish scholars and studies every year. So back in 2016, this group of Jewish scholars invited a Samaritan to come and speak to them at this symposium. So the Samaritan came and he began to talk to them, and he reminded them about the common Israelite tradition that exists between the Samaritans and the Jews. But then the next thing that he said to them was, when it comes to the matter of the worship of God and the place where we worship God, we Samaritans have it right, you Jews have it wrong. Not exactly a way to ingratiate yourself with your audience, but that's what he said. And then he went on to explain a little bit about why he believes that. And the Samaritans believe that the scripture that should be followed is the Torah. And according to the Torah, there's no indication there that the place to worship God is in Jerusalem. But in the book of Deuteronomy, he said, in the book of Deuteronomy, God is to be worshipped in the place where His name will be blessed, and that's Mount Gerizim. So again, he reminded his Jewish audience that we Samaritans have it right, but you Jews are heretics. Those were his words. Now, this issue that he brought up and that creates some animosity between the Samaritans and the Jews goes way back almost 28 centuries, if you can imagine such a thing. And if you go back to the time after the Babylonian captivity, once the Jews had been released, then when the Jews went to Jerusalem and they were going to rebuild the temple, the Samaritans offered to help the Jews do that. But the Jews rebuffed them and refused to let them do it, and that created a lot of friction between the Samaritans and the Jews. So the Samaritans then at that point, they began to antagonize the Jewish people as they were rebuilding the temple. And you can read about that in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. They caused all sorts of problems for the Jews as they rebuilt the temple. And not only that, but they even encouraged the Persian rulers to cause problems for the Jews. So there were all sorts of issues that went on as far back as that time period. And then over the years, through the centuries, it continued. As you come into the intertestamental period, you have that same sort of thing continuing, where you have Antiochus the third is ruling, and the Samaritans sold the Jews into slavery under the reign of Antiochus the third. And they did a lot of other things as well. Let me see if I can get back to my notes here. I can remember all these things. The Jewish priests at the time of the new moon festival, the month of the new moon, they would start up a fire that was intended to be a signal fire. And once the fire started and the smoke started, then Jews all along the way would start a fire, and it provided a signal to all the Jews that the new month had started, and it went all the way to Babylon that way. Well, the Samaritans interfered with that. And then beyond that, during the early days of Jesus, the Samaritans defile the temple in Jerusalem by scattering dead man's bones in the temple at the time of the Passover. So just one antagonism after another on the part of the Samaritans toward the Jews. Then under John Hyrcanus, they reduced the Samaritan city, this is the Jews, by the way, in retaliation. They destroy the city of Samaria, and they desecrate the Samaritan religion by destroying their temple on Mount Gerizim. So you kind of get the picture. This is not necessarily new to any of you, but you've had this back and forth all this time for all these centuries going on. And so by the time we get to the time of Jesus and the text that we're going to read tonight, we want to kind of keep those things in mind, that cultural, political, religious context and the antagonism that existed between those two groups. Keep that in your mind as we read from Luke chapter 17, beginning in verse 11 and going down through verse 19. Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go show yourself to the priest." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw that he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at the feet of Jesus and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has not one returned, or has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." As this story starts, you see up in verse 11, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. Now this journey to Jerusalem started before this. If you go back to Luke chapter 9 and you read verse 51 of Luke 9, we read about this, and it says there in Luke 9:51, as the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. So when we get to Luke 17, Jesus is already determined to go to Jerusalem. He's on his way, in fact, to Jerusalem. And this is not just a spontaneous, I think I'll go to Jerusalem trip. But this is something that he's doing because it's part of God's plan, God's purpose for him. So he's on his way to Jerusalem. And on his way to Jerusalem, this happens that we just read in Luke 17. He's traveling. And the text says he's traveling along the border between Samaria and Galilee. And I think it's important that I talk a little bit about this because I think it will help us to understand what's happening in the story better if we talk about it. The phrase in verse 11 where it says, along the border between Samaria and Galilee, is a prepositional phrase in Greek. I'm going to write it up here. I don't write too well, so diameson is the way you would say that. And this word meson literally means middle. Okay? The text actually is talking about Jesus traveling through the middle of Samaria and Galilee. Not the outskirts, not the border, not as you think about Palestine, you've got, this is very crude, but the Jordan River comes down here, Galilee is up here, Samaria is here, Judea is down here, which includes Jerusalem, Jericho somewhere down here. And you know the story, how the how the Jews, when they go to Samaria, when they're coming down from the north, they cross over before they get to Samaria to the east side of the Jordan River, and they go down the east side of the Jordan River and come back in at Jericho and make their way to Jerusalem. That's the way they usually did it. The point that Luke is making is that Jesus didn't do that. Jesus traveled through Samaria, through the middle of it. Now, we don't know which direction Jesus was going. Scholars and translators have a problem with this because they assume that Jesus was traveling from the north to the south. But it doesn't say that. It says that Jesus was on a journey. It was a process. And he was going through Samaria and Galilee. It sounds like when you look at Luke 9, he's down in Samaria already. And he's traveling through Samaria back up into Galilee before he comes back to Jerusalem. But whatever the case is, he's going through Samaria. The word dia, the preposition, if you have a circle up here representing an object, it denotes movement going through an object. That's exactly what Jesus was doing. If the object was Samaria, Jesus is traveling through Samaria. Now, part of the reason this gives a problem to Bible translators and scholars is because this particular phrase, the way it's written, especially the ending of that phrase, is totally unexpected. They would have expected the O-N to be O-U, and that's not Norman, Oklahoma. But that particular inflected form is the form that's used when this preposition is being used to mean through. But it's a surprise. It's got this ending. Why? Because when you have that ending, this preposition means because. So that's why scholars struggle with it so much. It trips them up and they try to figure out what's going on. So I did a little looking, and I don't want to belabor this, but it's important for the point that Luke's making, I think. I looked this up. The only place where you have this phrase in the New Testament is this passage. Everywhere else, it's dia mesu, which you would expect. You see it everywhere. I checked the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. This phrase is not used. I checked papyri. There's a few places where it's used. And I found 4 places in the classical writings in the Loeb Library where it was used. It's interesting how it's used there. Plutarch writes about friendship. And in writing about friendship, he uses this exact phrase to refer to the area between two friends, the middle between two friends, that holds them together even when there may be some anger and conflict between them. Other people who aren't friends, they have this anger and conflict. It's more likely that they will separate, the relationship will break. But Plutarch is talking about how that doesn't happen to friends because of this middle area that they share together. Hippocrates uses the same phrase when he's talking about setting a fractured or a dislocated arm. And he talks about how it's better to set it in the middle rather than extended some way, whatever way it would be, or rather than, something like this. Put it in the middle, because then once it heals, it's more functional. Even if you can't move it very much, it's in a better position in the middle, he says. Then the third example that is used of this particular phrase is by, can't remember now who it was that used it, Dionysius. And he talks about how you pronounce the letter S. Where do you put your tongue in relation to your palate and your mouth when you pronounce S? It's in the middle of your mouth, your palate. And you let the air come through and it makes that sound. And so he talks about that, and he's using that word to describe the middle position in the mouth. All these uses of this phrase are referring explicitly to the middle. And not only does it talk about the middle, I might also mention real fast that the verb that's used with that is dierkato. This is dia. It's the same preposition that's there. And the Greeks, they had a habit of, when they would use a compound verb with the preposition on the front, they would repeat it again after the verb, which is what happens here. But you would expect that ending. So this is an idiom, actually is what it is. It's an idiom that means through the middle of Samaria, but it has within it a connotation of being in that middle position produces some sort of effect. There's a reason for it. There's a cause for it. So when you think about what Jesus did, he traveled through the middle of Samaria. He was doing it because it was the middle of Samaria. Now let me just ask you, can you think of any places in the Gospel of Luke, any events, do they come to mind, that might have provoked Jesus into traveling through the middle of Samaria rather than going around the outskirts like they normally did? Anything come to mind? You might turn to Luke 9 again. Very interesting, back in Luke 9, not only does it tell us about Jesus starting his journey. By the way, Jerusalem is not only or merely a destination, it's a destiny. That's where Jesus is traveling, is to his destiny. And in verse 52 to 56, listen to what this says. He sent messengers on ahead who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. Now think about what we just talked about a while ago. He's going to Jerusalem. They assume to worship as a Jew. They think you worship God in Mount Gerizim, so they're not going to cooperate with him. They wouldn't welcome him because he's heading for Jerusalem. And when the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to destroy them? I mean, having gone through what we've talked about, this makes a little more sense. Jesus turned and rebuked them. Then he and his disciples went to another village. Now let me just ask you, can you imagine Jesus is going about his ministry, he's making his way to his destiny to die on the cross for the salvation of the world, including Samaritans, by the way. And he's in Samaria, and his disciples just don't get it. And they want to call down fire and destroy all the Samaritans. Well, I can imagine Jesus later on his way to Jerusalem, having occasion to travel up to Galilee, and instead of going around Samaria to get there, what does he do? He goes right through the middle of it. Why does he do it? Because his disciples hadn't learned the lesson that he wants them to learn. They need to understand what Jesus is trying to teach them. So from 952 onward in the Gospel of Luke, the focus is on Jesus' destiny in Jerusalem and his focus on Samaritans, contrasted with the Jewish leaders most of the time. In fact, you remember the parable in Luke 13, the parable of the Good Samaritan. That's one of the emphases that Luke has in his gospel, is making a Samaritan the hero of the story. Boy, that would have irked the Jews, but that's what he did. So this focus on the Samaritans continues into our text in Luke 17, and it's underscored by the structure of the text itself. If I can quickly show that to you. At least this is the way I see it. Maybe that'll be good enough for you to see. It's what's called a chiastic structure, where you have parallels on the outside and an unparalleled portion in the middle. So verses 11 through 16a talk about 10 lepers who are cleansed. Okay? Jesus tells them to go to show themselves to the priest. Down here in verses 17 to 19, we have 10 lepers who have been healed, but only one of them comes back. Jesus says, "Where are the other 9?" Then in the middle of that, very emphatic by the position and by the language in the text itself, there's an emphasis on the word he. I'll put it in capitals. He was what? The one that returned. He was a Samaritan. So he emphasizes that he was a Samaritan. So usually the way these kind of structures work, the outer parallels tell you the topic of the story, and the center, unparalleled part, gives you the focus of the story. So think about how that affects how we read and understand this particular text. And let me just ask you, what do you think this structure of the text, if I'm correct here, what would be the point? What is Luke trying to communicate to us as an inspired writer telling this story, putting it together like this? What might be the significance of this structure? What's he trying to get us to see as we read it?
The failure of the Jews.
What's that?
The failure of the Jews.
Well, the failure of the Jews, yeah.
The faith of the Samaritan.
Yeah. There's an emphasis on the Samaritans because of his response, partly. But it shows Jesus' focus, doesn't it? That Jesus, in the Gospel of Luke, I think the main thing of the Gospel of Luke is salvation, probably. And Jesus is on his mission to save people. And his mission is inclusive. It's not exclusive to the Jewish people. It includes all people. It includes the Samaritans. And he's trying to get his disciples to see that he serves and loves, and he's going to die for all people of all nations, all ethnicities, not just the Jewish group. And so by putting it together like this and emphasizing that this guy that came back and gave thanks is a Samaritan, he's helping us to see the importance of how pervasive Jesus' work is. That he's going about his mission for the purpose of providing salvation for all people. That includes the people that they didn't like very much, that they didn't want to be around. They preferred to hightail it over here down the east side of the Jordan and back in instead of associating with these disgusting people. So, let me, let's see, what time is it, Steve?
6 o'clock, brother.
Oh, okay, I'm doing okay. I want to talk a little bit about application. Okay, I have some things, I wrote it down because I wanted to make sure I got all this in. I want to mention one more thing before I go to the application, and that is verse 19 of Luke 17. Jesus said to him, "Rise and go, your faith has made you well." Okay? This is a really strongly stated statement there as well. And the word well is actually the word that you see translated most other places, and very often in the Gospel of Luke, saved. It's possible some of your translations may translate it that way. Jesus is telling this guy, your faith has saved you. Think about the difference between the Jewish leaders and this Samaritan, between the 9 lepers and the one Samaritan. You know, this leaves the impression that the other 9 were Jews. Yes, sir.
They also indicate that the Samaritan wasn't only cleansed, he was saved.
Exactly.
The Jews were cleansed but not saved.
Yeah. There are 3 words used in this text, 3 different Greek words that have to do with healing. And this one is, I think, purposefully used at the end because it's kind of a double meaning possibility. Not only was he cleansed or healed, but he was saved. His sins were forgiven based on his faith. His faith is evident. Now, wait a minute. The 9, didn't they have faith? Jesus told them, go show yourself to the priest. They went. As they went, they were healed. But there's some difference between the faith of the 9 and the faith of this Samaritan. Because the faith of the Samaritan brought him back to Jesus, praising God and giving thanks to God for not only the healing, but by the time it's over, the salvation that he received. And faith is trusting. That's what he did. He trusted Jesus enough to come back and say thank you. Here's the applications. I want you to think about these things. Who do you most identify with in this story and the scenario that we've described? Is it the Jews who seek to avoid at all costs Samaria and the Samaritans, the places and the people they found distasteful and disgusting? Or is it the disciples who want to call down fire from heaven on them? Or is it Jesus who's called and compelled to die in Jerusalem for them and to travel through Samaria on his way to his destiny in order to show them love and compassion? Who do you identify with the most? The 9 Jews who were healed but failed to be thankful for God's gift through Jesus, do you identify with them? Or do you identify with this one Samaritan who was grateful for his grace and healing? Another question, who are the Samaritans in your life? Who do you possibly disdain and seek to avoid. Who would you like to destroy by calling down fire from heaven? It's not funny, but sometimes we kind of react the same way, don't we? What places and people do you avoid because you are biased and prejudiced against them? Let me encourage you to look to Jesus and follow his example. Keep in mind as your model how Jesus intentionally, purposefully, and bravely acted contrary to cultural taboos and political correctness of his day. Be purposeful in connecting with the Samaritans in your life. Instead of avoiding these people, start engaging them. Listen to them. Love them. Instead of belittling and rejecting them, pray for them. Show them mercy and compassion. This one hits me. Instead of keeping salvation to yourself as your own personal possession and right, view it as a gift from God to be shared. Be grateful and share it with the Samaritans in your life. Keep constantly in mind the reality and truth that God saves us through his Son Jesus. There is salvation in no other name. And even when we repent and we're baptized, we have earned nothing. Salvation is still a gift given to us through Jesus. It's still a gift and will always be so. Nothing we do before or after the fact makes God indebted to us. We are indebted to him. Only Jesus offers true deliverance. Only Jesus saves. Salvation, spiritual healing, is a divine gift, an act of mercy freely given to one who is unable to heal or save himself or herself. It calls for humility, faith, gratitude, and praise, all of which we see in this Samaritan. Last of all, we're called to humbly trust him, to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves, and to embrace his gift with gratitude and praise. Shame on us if we ever presume to earn or deserve his salvation because we've done something or because we've been born into the right family, the right group, or the right church. And shame on us if we keep this gift of salvation to ourselves. I forgot to ask you, what are we doing? Invitation, or is this the end of everything? Okay. I'll stop here, and maybe you have some questions or some comments. I'd be glad to hear them. I'll just open it up, and if you want to say something, you're welcome to, and if not, we're done. So,
I think the example that you gave that the Samaritans created so much problems for the Jews, the antagonism, what they did to rile them up.
mm-hmm.
It's one thing to have prejudice, but I think sometimes we say those people deserve it because
Yes.
they are out creating problems.
Yeah, and it's true.
And it's true.
They are.
But we got to get past that.
That's what Jesus
We gotta
did.
get past that.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's so important. I struggle with that. Well, I mean, there's plenty of people I think deserve whatever comes to them. But, you know, how did Jesus respond to those sort of people? And that's kind of the point of this story. You know, Jesus' choice, and it was a choice, a purposeful choice, to go right smack dab through the middle of Samaria, whichever direction he was going. And I can tell you the language of the text does not say he's skirting around the edge. The Greeks used these prepositions to be specific. He was going through the middle. And he's trying to teach us a lesson through that. So, anything else? Thank you for your comment.
There were really a lot of miracles during that time also. The woman at the well, and so on. So if he had gone around the edge, he would have missed
True.
all those people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would it have been dangerous for them to be going right through the middle, physically dangerous?
I would think it could have been. Being aware of some of the things the Samaritans did to the Jews over the century could have caused a lot of problems, which may be one of the reasons they went around. Might not have just been purely prejudice. It might be fear for their own life. Yes?
If he'd gone around the edge too, it would have made him no different than anyone else.
Yes. That's right. He was not going to do that. Yeah. A lot of courage. I think about, and I'll close this, I don't know if you remember it or not, but there's a passage, I believe it's in John 4, verse 4. It's another time that Jesus was traveling, and it says there, he had to go through Samaria. Open that up and read it. John 4:4, I believe, is the passage. And there's a little word used there, the word had. It's one of my favorite Greek words. It looks a lot like dia, but it's day, or D, depending on how you pronounce it. It literally means it is necessary. And the gospel writers, and Luke in the book of Acts in particular, they use that word to refer to a divine necessity. Something, it's not that Jesus had to do it, not that he didn't have a choice, but if God's will and God's purpose is going to be accomplished, he had to do it. So he chose to do it. He was compelled to do it because of his commitment to the purpose and the plan of God, that God was working through him. And there's a passage in the book of Hebrews where it records something Jesus said that's not in the Gospels. You probably recall it. I have come to do thy will, O God. That's a statement Jesus made. He's doing that here. And in doing that, and Luke in recording that the way he did, is challenging us to do the same thing. To live by that same commitment and purpose. Any other final comments? I guess we're done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.